I literally just came back from the barbershop. I hope it shows up on camera. Anyway, welcome everybody. Today I want to talk about one of my projects, and the reason for that is I got a really interesting comment about a video a very long time ago, and I had noted down the video idea of literally just going through a project and talking a little bit about what every track is about and how many different sounds are in there and whatnot. But to be honest, I just kind of forgot up until the point that I got a reply to that comment also telling me that I should make such a video. So here we are in a production that I've been working on for quite a while. This is not part of the album. This is going to be part of the later productions right after that. So this will be releasing as a single sometime after the album releases. And the reason why I've chosen this project is I consider this the final project that I've done, which is actually completely finished and therefore has basically all the tracks that are going to be in this project. What I'm going to be doing right now is just still finishing a little bit off of the details and maybe tweaking a sound here or there. Maybe that means that one or more sounds get added, but this is basically going to be it. And as you can see, in terms of categories, we have 7 different categories: drums, basses, synths, one-shots, pads, effects, and vocals. And really, if you're just interested into the count, what we can see is that we have from 18 up until 79, we have drums. Then we have a couple of bass tracks. As you can see, in total, we have the group and then 3 tracks in here. And then we have a 4th track, so there's 5 tracks in here. We have from 87 up until 128 in terms of tracks over here. Actually, there's a little bit more because the last one is a group, so this is actually up until 131 here. I'm not good enough at math to actually tell what the exact amounts are going to be, but that's going to be somewhere up in the edits once I have time to actually spend a little bit of time calculating that. Carry that. 1. Okay. Okay, so after doing all of the calculations, it turns out that you should actually subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Then we have the one-shots, which is probably the biggest group in here, just in terms of like the actual length. That is because probably there's more groups in this group over here and some other groups. I don't know if that means that these has the most elements, but it goes from 133 all the way up until 195. Then we have the pads from 197 up until 221. We have the effects from 223 all the way up to 53. And then finally we have the vocals going from 255 up until 279. Now that is just the sheer amount of tracks, which is cool, right? But it's not really that interesting. Like, what is more interesting is the why. And I think the reason why I use that many tracks is because I really like working with details and working with detail sounds. I'm going to close everything up again so that I can just have an overview of the project. And what I can show here is that there's going to be a lot of different sounds that are just going to be playing in one little area. So specifically one-shots, and you can also see it for some of the sequences. Maybe if I open just the sequences here, you can see that we have this thing playing over here for 8 bars. We have this thing playing over here for 16 bars and nowhere again in the rest of the track. We have this guy playing over here for 32 bars and nowhere else. We have this guy now over here again playing for 32 bars. In this case, it is actually like slightly coming in, it's being filtered in. And then here's where the melody of this element, where this is like one of the main elements, one of the main melodies, is really coming in. So really, this is the part where it's actually playing, and this is the part where it's being introduced. So the reason why I use that many tracks is because I really like having elements that are just a small part of the track and that are really standing out there. And as I said, that is also true for things like the one-shots, but also even for like some atmospheres in here. I'm sure that there's going to be like an atmosphere in here or two that is just going to be playing in one simple small section. So for example, this guy over here just plays in this one section. We have this guy playing over here only. We have these guys playing over here only. We have this guy playing over here only. We have this guy playing over here only. We have some stuff just playing in the intro, of course. Same is going to be true for a lot of different effects. As you can see, there's a lot of different effects that are just playing once. And what this allows me to do is it allows me to have much more detail-oriented productions, in the sense that every sound that I pick and put into a spot is going to be specifically chosen for that spot. What I see a lot of people do, say that we have this structure here. Let me again zoom out a little bit so that you can see the structure. Say that we have this structure here, which is just parts of 16 bars, right? Just duplicate it over. We have fills of 2 bars here, but you can see that basically every structure is the same. What I see a lot of producers do is they'll create an audio track and then they'll just go looking for some of their effects. Say that we take a downlifter from here somewhere. Right, let me actually find a good downlifter here for the example. Sweeps down here. Say that this is your downlifter, right? Drop is starting over here. First of all, I don't like a downlifter on the very first part of the drop. It just sounds off. That really sounds dumb to me. But what I also hear is people just doing this, where they just duplicate everything over and then every drop is going to have the same sample over and over again. And it's going to become very, very predictable, right? And then they'll go through it here and they will say, okay, I'm going to need a riser for this part. Okay, I'm going to need a riser. Let's take like one of a medium riser. Cool riser. I found my riser. Put the riser in there and just duplicate over up until the end of your segment, up until the end of the drop part here. This is going to sound very, very static and very boring in my opinion. And in my opinion, this is one of the factors that leads to tracks just not developing as much. Because what it also does is it means that if you're thinking about this when it comes to stuff like your downlifter and your uplifter and whatnot, you're most likely also going to think about this with the sequences. And really the reason why your sequences are interesting and why your sequences keep evolving has nothing really to do with one sound just changing from time to time. It has to do with the fact that there's a lot of different sequences playing here that are switching around, that are literally just either starting or stopping to play. Now, this does mean that with this approach, you need to do a lot more sound design because you're going to need to make sounds for every segment. But at the end of the day, that is going to yield you better results than trying to take the same sounds and through the use of effects, or what I hate most is through the use of playing different rhythms in different parts with the same sound, trying to make it more interesting like that, really that just sounds off to me. It really doesn't work for me. Like the way that I like to think of Psytrance is that it's this genre that is all about flow and constant change and constantly new ideas and constantly new interesting ways of beaming sound into the ears of the listener, so to say. And if therefore you continue to use the same sound over and over again, section after section, it just gets boring. Now, another reason why my track count is a little bit higher than your usual producers will be is because I really like having a very granular control over different elements. So for example, let's go into drums here and let's go to this drum group here. This is just your standard kind of orchestral drums where most people would just use a drum loop. And as you can see, I also have a drum loop in here, but I also wanted to be able to have individual hits in here. So this is the low drum loop. This is like really softly coming in, I believe. But you can hear that this is just the background to the actual main drums that sit in this part. And in my opinion, having this really nice like double slam here and then having this contrary like stuff happening over here. So this is kind of like a question and answer where the answer is given every other time that it plays. Right? Really, this is the moment where it comes out a little bit more, in my opinion, than just this individual hit. We also have this final hit over here. This is just a layer of the first hit here. So this doesn't really add any extra information to the rhythm, so to say. And there's actually many different places where I do stuff like this. If I go into my main drums group, the stuff that I'm having over here, you can see that this is made up of a couple of different loops. We have these two hi-hat loops over here, this guy and this guy. And then I have all of these samples over here, which are just there for like the control and the individual groove and the individual accents that I wanted to add to this. You can also hear that I'm doing a little bit of panning just to keep stuff interesting. So really this whole group of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different tracks are just closed hats here. And functionally speaking, I could have just done this with one of these loops, right? Having some open hats in here, if you just want a few open hats, this is an open hat loop. You just drop it in there and then you're done. But that becomes really boring. You can also see that this gives me a little bit of extra customization in the sense that there's going to be another extra drum loop happening over here. This one might have a little bit more stuff going on as well. It doesn't seem like it. It does seem like this has a little bit more of a like mid-range click to it. But this one just comes in later, and therefore it's just like an extra addition on top and another way to kind of step up the energy between this part over here and this part over here, among other things, because there's also like a snare being added and some other drums being added and whatnot. There's actually a 9th closed hat layered on top of all of this. And this is actually our real like main closed hat almost. And all of these things together are like the accents, I would say. And you can also see that later on in the track when we get into a different bass line, you can see we have, if I go into the bass lines, 2 different bass lines here. This is the rolling bass and this is more of a sliding bass kind of idea. We have a whole bunch of different drums that layer on top of that. But I'm also just using part of the actual thing that I've created over here to just spice this up a little bit and to make it a little bit different from what I'm doing in the rest of the track. In this case, we have our like custom ride as well and a different group for the snare. I say snare, but this is actually like a clap. 2 claps layered together, whereas the main rolling bass does use a snare. Just like a normal Psytrance snare. So those are all extra ways of making things interesting, and those are all extra reasons why you would just need extra tracks for that, right? If you just want to do this with a simple drum loop, you can. I've heard many people that just create a drum loop for that track, and then either the drum loop turns on in certain parts or the drum loop turns off in certain parts, or maybe they have like 2 stages where there's like half a drum loop playing and then there's the full drum loop playing in a section. I like to be as creative as possible and to try to do as much with it as possible and to change things up as much as possible. There are sections where I, for example, have a real high energy like feeling to it, but not having the snare in there. So for example, this is a good example of that. And if I do have the snare in here, this is going to sound just like the drums of every other part of the track. But I can make it more interesting by actually removing the snare, the element that you expect here, and listen to how this speeds up the track here. Much more focused on that offbeat hat here. I think it just sounds a lot nicer. And this is really something that you can only do if you have individual elements as opposed to like a drum loop somewhere that you're turning on and off. You can just select individual elements that you want to play with so that you have more of a granular control over what individual elements are doing. And therefore, the kind of story that you're telling, the amount of energy that you're introducing in the track, the way that you're introducing the energy in the track. In this case, because we're focusing more on the offbeat hat, which is a faster element than the snare, it is just going to naturally make the track sound faster. But also it's going to be a nice divide between this part, which has the clap, which is on every 2, of course, just like the snare on this part here. And then we have this part in the middle where that isn't the case. So therefore, this part of the track is going to stand out a little bit more than when the snare is there. And therefore, it's going to have like the same groove that is happening before and after it. The final thing that I want to show in this project is going to be the Oneshots. I mainly just want to show it because, again, it's going to be the same principle. There's going to be a lot of different elements that are just going to be responsible for playing in a particular part of the track. And what that usually means is that that element is specifically designed to be there, right? It's usually doing something that works well with the structure or that works well with the individual element that is playing on top, like one of the sequences, or one of the other things, say that there's like a big vocal playing there. If you see a one-shot that is just playing in one segment, that means that it was designed to be there and nowhere else. But as you can see, there's also stuff that is playing a little bit more throughout the track. And that is useful for just having an element that is a bit more of a theme, that is a little bit more of a reoccurring thing. I think most people know that there's a fairly strict balance between repetition and introducing new elements, which makes a track interesting. If you're always doing new stuff every single second of a track, it is going to be really hard to follow what you're doing. And if you're too repetitive, the track is going to get boring. So you need like a bit of both. And literally the way that I'm doing that is having some one-shots that play a couple of times. In this case, I have one that plays like 4 times. I have a few that play a few more times, but are a little bit smaller in the like space that they take up within the mix. And then of course, there's going to be a whole bunch of individual one-shots that are just going to play in one segment of the track, where they're there just to make that part of the track a little bit more interesting. Now, I think I've discussed it before, but this isn't the only way of writing interesting music. There is definitely multiple different ways. I've talked recently again to Lunatica, but in the first video where I talked to him, he mentions how he will just have a whole bunch of different sounds placed on one track, and he will just arrange through that and have everything on one track so that he can process everything together just on that track, but still having multiple different interesting sounds on there. As I mentioned before, I know a lot of other producers that will take the same sound and have it play different melodies or different rhythms, which in my opinion is really not the way to do it, because that just gets boring from the sound itself, the sound perspective itself. Like the sound doesn't change, it's just the way that the sound plays that changes. That really doesn't work for me. And like, I would say 99.9% of the time I have every sound play one melody, there's going to be one type of MIDI clip, and it is either going to repeat, like we see for a lot of the sequences, for example. We have one MIDI clip that is going to be the same rhythm over and over again, repeating, or maybe I have like made slight modifications to the rhythm. Let's turn off this, guys, so we can see what the actual rhythm is. Here we can see actually that it's the same rhythm, just over and over again, playing over and over again here. And that's going to be true for most of these guys. It's going to be the same thing. It's going to be the same rhythm. In this case, I believe this is a randomly triggered rhythm. So this is definitely doing like random rhythms over a longer period of time. But what you'll never see, for example, is that, say we go back to that melody, to this guy, that this melody now plays here, right? This guy over here. What you will not see me do is use this sound then in the next section, but playing a different melody. Yes, there are some rare cases where I'm going to have a sequence that is playing twice. For example, a support sequence like this guy. That doesn't even seem to make sound here. So it's technically not even playing twice, because this guy is... Why is that not playing then? Oh, because this guy turns up. Ah, I think that's an error. So I'm going to put this here. But I'm not sure if this is going to work now. Maybe this part becomes too busy. But anyway, now you can hear what kind of sound it is. It's actually these kind of particles here. So these are just meant for like background elements, and therefore I feel more comfortable repeating them multiple times, as they're not the main elements. They're never going to be in the foreground. But even then, the MIDI that they play or the rhythm that they're playing is always going to be the same. In this case, it's just going to be literally like 16 notes playing all the time. And that is also going to be true over here. You can see just like continuous 16 notes here. So anytime I create an idea for the track, it's usually restricted to one melody or one rhythm. And then I'm playing that in a very short part of the track. And if I want something new, if I want to introduce a new rhythm or a new groove, I will do that with a new element, because then I can adapt that element to the new groove that I'm making. And also so that it doesn't sound like I'm just using one sound and that is just like constantly changing throughout the track and doing different melodies, as opposed to actually, you know, having new ideas for different parts of the track. So that's everything that I wanted to talk about for today. I hope that this is useful and I hope that you enjoyed it. Let me know, of course, if you did like it and if it was helpful by leaving a like down below. And also make sure that you leave an interesting comment. And while you're there, make sure that you're subscribed as well. Another way to support the channel is to become a YouTube member, Patreon member, or Twitch subscriber, which gets you a whole bunch of different benefits like discount code for my products, early access to videos, and priority in my feedback streams. So if you do that, thank you very much, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.